Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video I will be wearing this hat. I just thought I'd warn you before we start that I have got a hat on. I was going to take it off, but I realised because I've been wearing it all day, because I've been doing some jobs in the garden, and I felt like this was the sort of hat that a man would wear if he was doing proper jobs. And then I just took it off and my hair looks a bit compressed, and as you know, the strength I get to do these YouTube videos actually comes from the plump and plushness of my hair. So I'm going to keep the hat on and see how that goes. On this video, I'm going to be going through the 10 greatest power trios of all time, and I'm going to be ranking them from 10 to 1, and at the end I will also go through the 3 biggest selling power trios to see if they're on my list. Right, so the power trio is a very interesting thing. There's less of them than you would have thought, right? I have played in many a power trio in my time, and I tell you why. It's because if you've got a power trio, you can play virtually any song, as long as the musicians are good enough, because the musicians are really having to fill out the sound. But the magic of a power trio is with guitar, bass and drums, you can create this huge sound. This means that if you turned up to a bar, or in the UK we would call them a pub, you could play and get the maximum money. Because if they're paying you $300, you can walk out with $100 each, right? You could all fit in one car if you've got a tiny drum kit and some small amps. So there's a compactness and easiness to the power trio, but it's a difficult thing to do, and I'll tell you why. It's because every great band needs a great front person. Me being a drummer, I've always tried my best to be a good back person, but we need a good front person as well, which means you need someone to be able to play the guitar or play the bass and sing at the same time and front the band, which is also means being the sort of visual center for most of the people in the room, talking, engaging the audience, working them up, right? People who can do all those things are few and far between, and that is why there are less power trios than you would think. Okay, so they're quite a rare commodity. Any successful power trio, it has to be, by definition, a great band, right? The players have to be great. Now, before I start, there's a couple of ones on this list that didn't make it. The one I'm the most worried about is the Jam. The Jam were a fantastic band. They floated around on this list, and there's a good argument that a couple could come off and the Jam could come on, because they were absolutely a classic power trio. But personally, they're okay. So bringing in my personal taste, which of course I do on these videos, I decided not to put them on because I always wanted to focus on some others which I think possibly, if not as influential and as not as big selling, did something unique with the power trio. There's a couple of power trios on here that I think did very special stuff with the what would you call this? The group structure. Right, so the Jam I was a bit worried about missing off. And then there's all those pop punk bands like Green Day and Offspring. Are they a power trio? I don't even know if they are. Green Day are, aren't they? Or Blink 182. I haven't got any of them on the list, but I don't think anyone who's watched this channel cares much about that. I will be chatting about Green Day in a minute. Anyway, so I'm aware that I'm sure you're going to start shouting at me. Where's this group? Where's that? Where's Mountain? You haven't got Mountain, Leslie West, all that sort of stuff. You know, so that's what's going to happen when you've watched the video. So I will look forward to those comments. Shall we just kick off? Start to get straight in there rather than treading water. Right, so at number 10, I have Primus. Now, Primus have sold millions of records. They've been hugely successful. If you watch or even listen to Eminem's first single, My Name Is, they get name checked on an Eminem record, as do 9 Inch Nails. So they've really hit mainstream culture. Now, for a band that really is somewhere between Level 42 and The Residents, it's quite an achievement that they've done so well. Primus emerged just sort of in the mid '80s. I had a band that was sort of in the mid to late '80s, which was sort of very level 42 influence. We were really into our slap bass, you see. And then we discovered Frizzle Fry. That was the first album I heard, and that would have been around about 1988, I imagine, maybe 1987. So I imagine they formed the mid 80s. So they're coming up at the same time as all those incredible outlandish bands like Fishbone, Living Colour, Faith No More, or the grunge bands like, you know, Nirvana and Soundgarden and all those types of bands, Red Hot Chili Peppers. And they sort of fitted in that world, but at the same time they didn't. They were such a strange band with Les Claypole's vocal delivery really coming from the Residents, without a doubt, and doing things with the bass. So this power trio is a classic power trio, you know, bass, guitar, drums, but they've turned it around so it's lead bass. He is leading the way with the bass, and leading the way with the bass like nobody had ever done before. He strikes me a little bit in the same sort of category as Buckethead. A brilliant musician, but a left field musician that's pulling on more than just being a virtuoso. I could have also mentioned in this category King's X, which were an incredible power trio. But King's X were actually a little bit more conservative than Primus and never sold anywhere near. And that's the thing I found so strange with Primus, is that they were so successful that I would see them on MTV. And I think the reason is because although they were weird, they managed to take that weirdness and stitch it into a narrative which the audience understood. They knew that they were weird. You know, you want to get into some weird? I'll go and listen to Primus. They were a huge influence on me at the time. There was a huge influence on the band I was in at the time. A really incredible band. When I first got into them, the drummer that they had, can't remember his name, but I was interested in another band that I'm now going to mention on the channel, that had been produced by Bill Laswell, and were called the Limbo Maniacs. And they had a drummer called Brain, and then Brain moved over. He joined Praxis alongside Buckethead, and then Brain went from there to playing with Primus, if I got all that right. I'm not a super expert on Primus. And so, yeah, they're definitely coming out of that world of those musicians, these left field, strange musicians, right? So, yeah, Primus, incredible power trio. They're a weird one and got us off to a great start at number 10. When you talk about classic power trios and that thing of the singer having to not only be a great singer but a great bass player or bass guitarist, or guitarist, sorry. When we start to look at the classic power trios, it's surprising how good the vocalists are. When we come to sort of just the classic rock sound, that hearty, you know, sort of Paul Rodgers-esque, Steve Marriott-esque voice, right? You go hard pressed to beat the late great Scottish singer and bass player James Dewar, who sang in one of my favourite power trios, and the power trio I've got at number 9, which is the Robin Trower group. The Robin Trower group had come out of sort of Hendrix's trio, not literally, but influence-wise, sound-wise. There was a psychedelicness and a rootsiness and a funkiness to Hendrix power trio, which Robin Trower, who before that had played with Procol Harum and done a lot of that hippie weird stuff, he then jumped straight into this almost like classic, you know, blues power trio, but it's not, because he's got that sort of phasing chorus guitar sound that Hendrix has, and he spins out these beautiful sounds. Now, I absolutely adored this power trio, one of my favourite power trios. What incredible sound. And a lot of it had to do with the other two guys. Robin Trower, of course, is an incredible guitar player who explored a certain aspect of Hendrix so well, in much the same way as Stevie Ray Vaughan also explored another side of it, the more sort of dirty blues side of it. And of course, there's another power trio that nearly made was the list, which was Stevie Ray Vaughan's. I really didn't, because I think Stevie Ray Vaughan was incredible, but I always felt the other two guys were a little bit lackluster. But this wasn't the case with the Robin Trower group. As I said, James Dewar, not only an incredible singer, but a funky, punchy bass player. And then on drums, they had a guy called Bill Lorden. And Bill Lorden, before that, had played with Sly and the Family Stone. He was a funky drummer. This was a funky group. They're probably most well known for the album Bridge of Sighs, which is an absolute classic. And if you want to go and check out the Robin Trower group, I would go for Bridge of Sighs. But my favourite album was the one that came out after that, which is Long Misty Days, where they do Caledonia. And there's this incredible bubbling wah-wah work from Robin Trower. So absolutely incredible band. So we started off with two little bit left field. Those are the ones that I could easily have, I could take those away and we could probably stick up the Jam, up there if you wanted, but it's my list, so that's what we've got. But at number 8, I have played it safe, although I know this is going to upset some of the people who watch this channel, a number of them, because they don't seem to like this band. And every time I mention them or say they're any good in any way whatsoever, I get pushback. So let's bring the pushback on. At number 8, I have Nirvana. Now, Nirvana, of course, were like the poster children of the Seattle grunge scene. What are we going to say about Nirvana? Their influence is so huge. And I know the older people who watch this channel that don't associate with young people that much are going to say, well, where's the influence now? They only made 3 albums, blah, blah, blah. And it's not the case. If you work with young kids as young as 12, 13, 14, as soon as they pick up a guitar, there's a number of things they're pulling from. I'll tell you what they're pulling from: Metallica, Black Sabbath, and Nirvana. And that's what you see over and over again. So if we take heavy rock, punk rock, heavy metal, whatever you want to call it, there's a line that starts with Sabbath and starts with Uriah Heep and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple, and it moves through a certain direction. And as it moves, it flirts between going towards a sort of vaudevillian sort of showiness of a Van Halen, or at best or at worst a Kiss or a Bon Jovi, right? And this is always where the makeup comes out, right? There's always that show end, and then pulling it back to the dirt roots of a real rock band, power trio, guitar, bass and drums, and just kicking it. And rock music has skirted between those. By the mid-80s, we had succumbed to a whole bunch of quite awful hair metal bands that were as removed from Black Sabbath as any band could be. And then the grunge thing happened, and a whole bunch of bands came out, which, to be honest, were doing all sorts of things. Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden are all different in their own way, as were Nirvana. So why Nirvana is so important, as people say, Soundgarden was so much better, or Alice in Chains was so much better. And it's true. I love both of those bands more than I loved Nirvana. I was quite distrustful of Nirvana when they came. I thought, what the hell's this? They seem to have packaged up sort of like a punk band and, just added a few sort of heavy Black Sabbathy riffs. What's this all about? Me being a little bit older and knowing, right? But that album, Nevermind, went on to sell millions. 20 million, 25 million. How many has it sold? Off the top of my head, I'm not too sure, but that one album sold literally millions. More than the Ramones ever did. More than the Sex Pistols ever did. More than Black Flag, or Pavement, or the Pixies ever did. Nirvana is the full stop. It's where that punk attitude that actually starts with Chuck Berry and runs through rock and roll, it ends at Nirvana. And after Nirvana, all rock bands are a pastiche. Korn, Rage Against the Machine, and then you have Linkin Park and Limp Bizkit. And now you have the sort of, AI-generated metal bands like Bring Me the Horizon that pass for rock now. All coiffured hair and makeup, very much like a contemporary Kiss. Nirvana weren't that. They were the beginning and the end, right? And their position in music history is so important. They were not a terrible band. They were a great band, and they wrote great songs. They had an incredible sound. Kurt Cobain was an incredibly charismatic front man. Not the greatest guitarist in the world, but able to deliver incredibly hooky riffs. But with Dave Grohl, who we now know, it's an incredible rock drummer. Although, where has he ended up? In the sort of the tribute band to the whole of the rock and roll era. That's what the Foo Fighters are. You know, still there as they approach 60, you know, flying the flag for rock. You know, everything that Nirvana was against. And that's how important they are. And so, yeah, there's a lot of positive influences in that, you know, people still pick up a guitar because of Nirvana. They still want to play. Those songs are easy to play for young people. When they get it right, it sounds great, and they can impress their friends because they've got Smells Like Teen Spirit down. The first album, Bleach, is a lot more rawer. It's a lot more in your face. It's uncompromising. It is an alternative rock album. In Utero, which is my favourite one, Utero, In Utero, is left field as well. You know, produced by the great Steve Albini that passed away a few weeks ago, far too young. You know, this changed everything. Bands like Motley Crue just didn't know what to do. It's like all these metal bands, you know, like they didn't know what to do. You know, Led Zeppelin, probably the greatest heavy rock band of all time, grabbed Steve Albini and went into the studio to make, you know, Walking into Clarksdale, which was their version of Nirvana. Everybody, in their way, doffed their hat, their cloth cap, as we do in the UK, to Nirvana. I'm going on too long here, and we're going to get onto a band on number 7 that I've never spoken about before. It's one of my favourite bands. Right, so at number 7, I have got the incredible ZZ Top. I love ZZ Top. How did I get into ZZ Top? I'll tell you how. Because in 1984-85, when I was 16 years old and still quite an impressionable person that may have got into Weather Report and may have got into Mahavishnu Orchestra at that point, I can remember sticking on the tube one night, and this band was on stage playing tracks off their latest album, which was called Eliminator. What I could see were these two guys wearing grey boiler suits, right, with these huge beards, right, doing this choreographed movement with this incredibly funky, chunky, Texasy, sort of dirty rock music. And every time Billy Gibbons kicked off on the guitar to do a solo, he had a vibe to him like Jimi Hendrix, but not Jimi Hendrix. It was his own vibe. In fact, little did I know that Jimi Hendrix, when Billy Gibbons was just a mere blip, a mere teenager on the scene, had turned around and said, that's a great guitar player. Right? And he was. And he is. And ZZ Top were incredible. They had been around for a while when the Eliminator came out, and they'd sold a lot of records, right? But they were at that point where a band like that should have really now gone away. But with some clever videos for Smart Dressed Man and all those songs, you know, them driving around in that red car. Before you do it, they had one of the biggest selling albums of all time, right? From that point, they were done in, you know, and there has been some good albums then. But I then went back and started to go and check out things like El Loco and Del Guelo, Tres Hombres. And what I found was this is more than just a sort of, you know, Texas rock and roll band, right? They had elements of like a little bit of jazz rock here, a little bit of funk here, a little bit of this there. They were wider. They weren't an AC/DC. They weren't a Status Quo. They were ZZ Top. Frank Beard was an incredible drummer, and is an incredible drummer that had that funky swing and that sort of ebullience that you would get from the jazz fusion drummers. I can remember getting, is it Del Guelo that's got Cheap Sunglasses, and hearing that. I think also that was on TV. They showed an old video of them on the old Grey Whistle Test doing Cheap Sunglasses, and you know, Frank Beards has got his sin drums, you know, go boo, and doing all this mad stuff they never expect them to do. I really love them. Anyone who watches my channel will know that I'm fascinated by facial hair, right? ZZ Top, right? In 1984, nobody looked like that. Now everybody looks like that. Everybody looks like ZZ Top, and it's taken away from what's too special. You know, I've watched, Billy Gibbons recently, and he seems to be wearing two hats, or at least he's got a bandana. It looks like he's got two hats on. And I'm thinking, Billy, how old are you? You must be about 85. And, two hats doesn't make up from having great big matching beards. Of course, Dusty Hill, who famously used to walk around with a derringer pushed down his cowboy boot until it blew one of his toes off, right, has died recently. And they got some other guy that looks quite ridiculous, actually. But anyway, the beards, this wasn't a publicity stunt. They decided to have some time off, and they went off. And what do Texan people do when they have some time off? They don't shave. And when they came back, Dusty Hill and Billy Gibbons had grown these long beards. And you know who hadn't grown a beard? Frank Beard. Right, there's no point in me talking about ZZ Top properly. Right, absolutely none at all. They're so ridiculous. This is a band that went out on tour and decided to take a bunch of Texas animals onto stage. So they got like whatever Texas animals they've got, not buffaloes, but some sort of wieldy beastie thing walking around, and maybe, rattlesnake doing this, and a few jackrabbits, coyotes, or whatever you have in Texas. I haven't got a clue, I'm English. Anyway, ZZ Top, one of my favourite bands, and they're just a magic sound. And the funny thing with them is they get round the front person thing by having two front people that you can't really tell the difference, that sing the same and look the same and move exactly the same. It's an incredible thing. No one else has done that, I don't think, in terms of power trios. Shall we move on to number 6? At number 6, I have one of the greatest bands of all time. I have a band that if they didn't exist, you would be listening to me talk now, because it's the band that fired me up into getting all this stuff behind here and learning these drums and guitars, that I heard in 1980 when they came out with their album Ace of Spades. Of course, it's Motorhead. And we're talking the classic lineup. Lemmy Kilminster, that previously, before that, had been a roadie for ELP and had been a roadie for the Jimi Hendrix Experience, and then had gone and joined Hawkwind and had taken their psychedelic sort of rock and roll sound and pared it down, and wasn't influenced by punk, because Lemmy is punk, right? Lemmy is rock and roll, and forms this band Motorhead. And as far as I'm concerned, once they were together, they could do no wrong. Overkill, Bomber, Ace of Spades, Iron Fist, No Sleep Till Hammersmith, some of the greatest albums ever made. Motorhead, for me, are the great rock band. They sit between rock and roll, and they sit between heavy metal and heavy rock and punk rock. They're right in the middle of all those things. An absolutely incredible band. And Lemmy Kilminster was a force of nature, and actually a very erudite and intelligent person that had grown up through the history of rock and roll, right back to the early 60s. And that classic lineup with Fast Eddie and Filthy Animal Taylor was incredible. But even once they went, they were still incredible. Right up to the last lineup, they were incredible. So I've spoken about them so much on this channel. What more can I say? Well, I can tell you what I can say is I bought the single Ace of Spades, incredible. I asked my mum and dad for the album, and I got it for Christmas. By 1982, I was a huge fan of Motorhead. I live near Birmingham, and up in Birmingham, we used to have a venue called the Birmingham Odeon, and all these new wave of British heavy metal bands would come through. I was about 13 at the time, so to go to a Motorhead gig would have been a little bit of a push for someone of that age. Coming from a nice middle-class family, my mum and dad wouldn't let me, so my dad wasn't going to take me, so I went to my friend and we persuaded her dad to take us, and he took us up to the Birmingham Odeon in March 1982 to watch Motorhead. It was full of what looked like to me Hell's Angels. We were sat there looking very unheavy metal, although I did have my heavy metal sweatshirt on, but I don't think I looked very heavy. What I saw was the loudest gig I've ever to this day seen. Tank opened up for them. They came down from the roof on chains. There was a great big fist with lights in its fingers, and they were incredibly loud. And they were touring Iron Fist at the time, which is why they had the Iron Fist. And Iron Fist, the track Iron Fist, which had just come out a single, I just bought it, and I loved even more than Ace of Spades. It's one of my favourite songs. You know me, you know me, prepared to die. You know me, a day like this. I've never been the Iron Fist. I can't remember the lyrics, but I remember the vibe. Right, I'm looking at my piece of paper. Right, shall we move on to number 5 now? At number 5, we have a group that has not got a guitarist in. And I thought, can I put them in? Because, you know, if I'm going to start doing that, I could have the Bee Gees, couldn't I? Because they're a trio. And I could have the Wes Montgomery trio, because they're a trio. And suddenly I've opened the door and we're not in the same ballpark. So, yeah, this band hasn't got a guitarist. I'll tell you why. Because at number 5, I've got Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who at the moment are like my favourite band. I hated them when I set this channel up. I'd hated them for years, right? And the reason why, it was because when I was 16, 15, when I first heard their ELP, it was the same time I heard the Mavish Orchestra. I've told this story over and over again. And the thing was, I loved them, and then I heard the Mavish Orchestra, and that was the thing I was looking for. And at that point, I compared them, and I never should, because ELP do their own thing. As I've got older, I realised that Keith Emerson is so important in terms of progressive rock. He is like the heart and soul of progressive rock. Whereas all the other musicians seem to be moving towards progressive rock, Keith Emerson is progressive rock. It's a great big dose of rock and roll. A great big dose, and when I say rock and roll, we're talking Jerry Lee Lewis rock and roll, you know, we're talking Little Richard. There's a great big dose of classical music in there. There's a great big dose of jazz coming through Oscar Peterson. So you've got the jazz, you've got the rock and roll, and you've got the classical, but you've also got the Hendrix. Keith Emerson, and who the hell else could do this, transferred what Hendrix was doing on guitar onto the organ. So you had a person at the front, right? And again, ELP, a little bit like ZZ Top, but nothing like ZZ Top, also had 2 front people. Because you got Greg Lake, which is your normal front person, you know, that's singing and he's playing the bass. And then you got Keith Emerson, who's not singing, but he's stabbing the keyboards. And who's he stabbing the keyboards? What's he stabbing it with? With that Nazi dagger that's been given to him by Lemmy. The band that went before, they're all related. That sound that he has on the organ and the heaviness. You know, when you listen to pictures of an exhibition and you listen to The Goblin, you realise Mussorgsky was the original heavy metaler. Right? So them pulling in like Bartok on the first album, or pulling in Mussorgsky, right? By pulling in these influences, there was a heaviness in that only the organ could get across. ELP should be mentioned in the same breath as Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep and Deep Purple in terms of defining heaviness. But they defined another type of heaviness, and that's a heaviness that we then see in King Crimson, that we see in Van der Graaf's Generator, that we see in the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And as I've got older, I've realised how incredible they are. What incredible drummer Carl Palmer was, the right guy for the band, because there's a space in that group. If they'd have got some funky drummer, because Carl Palmer was never funky, if they got some funky drummer, like Keith Emerson had in The Nice with Brian Davison, who was a pocket drummer, right? Then this space that opens up between the keyboards and the bass, which isn't filled by that guitar sound, although Keith Emerson is doing his best to, that brashness is filled out with Carl Palmer sound. So it's a magical trio. Let's give some props to Greg Lake. This is a guy that could write incredible acoustic guitar ballads. So they had a songwriter that had quality, right? A band is only as good as their songs, and he could write an incredible song. He'd got this incredible tenor voice that was really expressive. And as a bass player, and this was pointed out when I did my 10 great prog bass players, and everyone said, what about Greg Lake? And I was like, well, Greg Lake is it's not really a bass, but he's just a bass player, a singer. I mean, he's just feeling out, isn't he? He's a bit like Geddy Lee. And then you realise Geddy Lee's an incredible bass player, as is Greg Lake. And Greg Lake is performing and singing those bass lines in ELP. So that guy's something else. Absolutely incredible. So that's what I've got at number 5, ELP, my sort of recently rediscovered power trio. And I've put them on there. Right, at number 4, speaking of Geddy Lee, they've got to be on this list and they're pretty high up. At number 4, I have the incredible Rush. Formed in 1970, first album came out in 1973, and at that point they were a very talented but very derivative hard rock band, you know, really pulling wholesale from Cream and Led Zeppelin and a little bit of Arthur Lee's Love, 7 and 7 Years. There's a little bit of that in there, and the tumbling sound. John Rutsey didn't want to tour because he had got, I think, diabetes. He wasn't well enough to do it. So he goes, and this weirdo nerd drummer walks in, Neil Peart, who not only brings this defining style in, but also brings in the push to go towards prog, and also to be able to write lyrics that will pull on all these literary stuff, turning them from a sort of quite cool hard rock band like Led Zeppelin to the ultimate nerdy incel band, which is what Rush are, right? And I was one of those types when I was young, you know, very pasty, sat in my bedroom, never going out, would never have said boo to a goose or a girl, right? And as I sat in my sort of self-imposed loneliness, right, I could get solace from putting on my Rush albums and realising I was not alone, as Geddy sung about all the subdivisions that existed out there in the world. Couple of things, interesting things about Rush, because I've spoken to them about them so much on this channel, right? They are one of the great rock bands. They may be the greatest rock band of all times in terms of an actual band, because their virtuosity level was very high. They are not the same players as you would get in, say, Steely Dan or, I don't know, Frank Zappa's band. They are a band, right? They're brilliant because they work together. You know, none of these guys were going to cut it as session musicians. Their magic was those three people together. More than any group on this list, they were able to take the power trio idea and just expand it out. So they were one of the few power trio progressive rock bands. And the reason is because somehow Geddy Lee could play keyboards and bass at the same time. And I've seen them live, and he did, and it was insane. I just did like a piggy snork after it because I was so adamant in that statement. I'll do it again. You know, I've seen them live, and he could. Right? So, where do we get back on track? Their progressive rock credentials, which are very high, they will always figure in any 10 greatest progressive rock bands list. And they are the greatest progressive rock band from over the pond, right? And I've got in trouble for calling them American, but if you're English, you know, you've got that Atlantic Ocean, and then that's America. The ex-colonies, Canada, the United States of America, and then down below you've got all those other ones. And so that sort of more quainter aspect that Canada has informs Rush. They have a quirkiness and weirdness which aligns themselves with the sort of English aesthetic, which is why when they're at their proggiest peak on Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, they were here an hour away from my house down at Rockfield Recording Studios, making Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres. I too have made progressive rock in those studios many a time, and I too have set my drum kit up in exactly the same spot where they recorded the drums for those incredible albums. Those birds you hear at the beginning of Farewell to Kings, as Alex Lifeson walks across the quadrangle of Rockfield, are Welsh birds. They're not English birds, because Rockfield is actually in Wales. It's just round the corner from Monmouth. And that town has also got a rock history. But we'll move on from this because we'll get sucked in. But yeah, they're progressive rock. They're true progressive rock, right? Fly By Night, Caress of Steel, yeah, they're proggy. 2112 full on prog. Although it's side 2 prog. I don't think it is actually. But Farewell to Kings is prog. That is prog. Hemispheres is prog. That is prog. Permanent Waves, it's a sort of new type of prog. It's going to inform the prog of the 80s. I think Moving Pictures is the same sort of thing. I think of them as progressive rock albums. By the time we got to singles, the prog has left the building. And that was 40 years ago. They didn't really return full to the prog until Clockwork Angels, the final album. They really are one of the greatest bands. They're one of my favourite bands. And the thing I love about Rush is the critics hate them. Everybody hated them. The cool people hated them. The punks hated them. The metalers hated them because they were too clever. Everybody hated Rush except for us lonely virgin incels, right? They were the only ones who supported them. But there were so many of us, and we've all grown up. And because we worked harder at school than all the punks, we got reasonable jobs, and they all got good jobs now, and they've made some money. And once they made some money, they were able then to ensnare a mate and reproduce. And then these kids of these nerds, then they came up and they said, Daddy, what sort of music do you like? You know, did you ever listen to the Ramones? No way, son. I never listened to the Ramones. They were absolute rubbish. No, I liked Rush. What Rush? What are they like? Oh, you will not believe it. They're like a cross between Led Zeppelin and a progressive rock band that's got Donald Duck on helium as a singer. Wow, that sounds like the best band in the world. Can I listen to it? Yes, you can. This is called Tom Sawyer. Oh, wow, I saw this on Futurama once and I really liked it when they were shooting down the UFOs. Yes, they have actually gained a strange cultural capital. And cool bands like Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan has said how great they are. And that bloke from the Foo Fighters, you know, the one that used to be in that punky band, he likes them as well. What, do cool people like them now? Yes, they all say they liked them because secretly everybody does like Rush. And so now they just beaten everybody up. They've been going for 50 years. Now, of course, they haven't been going for 50 years because, of course, Neil Peart died about 5 years ago. That was, I mean, it was the biggest shock I've had in my life. All right? When I found out Neil Peart had died, it was on a par with finding out that Terry Wogan had died, which means nothing to anybody outside of the UK. But we all know in the UK how bad that was. Love Terry Wogan. I'd driven my wife up to the shop and she said, I'll just nip in and get some peanut butter and milk. So I sat in the car, put the radio on, and they said, oh, Terry Wogan has died. I burst out crying. It was like my dad had died. But when Neil Peart died, it wasn't like my dad dying. Neil Peart occupied something else to me. He was like that kid that was like a few years older than you and wasn't super cool, but they knew everything, right? They just seemed to know about everything. Politics, geography, history. You know, he was one of those people, right? And I was a drummer and bloody hell, Neil Peart, when you're 15 years old, he was just he was like a wizard. That's what Neil Peart was. And when he died, and the fact is he's no longer around, and they're such a lovely band. They seem to really like each other, right? And there was a dynamic going on because Neil Peart was so shy and Alex Lifeson was so extrovert. And Geddy Lee, who was the front person, was sort of the balance between the two. It was a lovely thing. And so you've still got Geddy and Alex there, and it's lovely. They seem like such good friends when they pop up, right? I did a video once where we discussed, should they reform, should they go and get Mike Portnoy or somebody on drums? But they can't get Mike now because he's joined Dream Theater. It'd be too confusing to have Mike, you know, rejoin Dream Theater and then join Rush, right? So there's a debate of who should be on drums in Rush. My vote goes for Meg White. Do something different, lads. She's disappeared. She's not doing anything, right? Right? She's shy. Get Meg White in. Play some rock. It wouldn't be the same, would it? At number 2 on my list, I have got Cream, the original power trio. They were going to be at number 1 because being an originator for me always trumps, and I hate to use that word at the moment because we just found out he's been arrested on 34 charges, hasn't he? But let's leave that trump out of it. Cream has trumped. I didn't know what I was talking about now. Oh, shall I take my hat off? Let's see what my hair's looking like. Oh, you see, that's what I was worried about. It looks like a carpet. A grey carpet of experience. A rock and roll experience clamped to my head. But with my MAGA cap. Make art rock great again. I don't want to talk about Cream. I've said too much about them. Well, you know what I'll do is I will combine them with number 1. Because number 1's a bit weird and we'll get a more interesting conversation if you do it like that way. So yeah, Cream at number 2. At number 1, and they're directly related. They almost hold your hands, these two bands. I have the Jimi Hendrix. What? The Jimi Hendrix Experience? Or the Band of Gypsies? Right? No, it's not going to be those. This list is probably my most weird list. I always have a bizarre choice on my lists, but never a number 1. I always play it safe with number 1, and I've sort of played it safe because we all know that Jimi Hendrix is the greatest power trio of all time, right? We know that. Cream invented it, and then Hendrix came on and took it and turned it into something else, right? There's no band that's ever surpassed them. I have missed out number 3. I've gone from Rush to Cream. Bloody hell. Right, so I'm going to backtrack now. It's exciting, this is, because I've got a number 3 that you don't know about, right? Because rather than my computer with it all laid out, I've written it down on a piece of paper and I couldn't read my writing. And I got so excited about Rush. And I've missed out number 3. So you know what number 2 and number 1 is. Number 2 is Cream and number 1 is Jimi Hendrix. But what have I got at number 3? So the tension's back again. You were just about to click off then. You thought, oh no, what's number 1? I'll go now. I'm not interested in Andy's stupid, rantle, bizarre, surreal monologue he delivers at the end of the video. That someone else can appreciate that. I'm not interested in it. I mean, he's doing it now. Look at him. There he is going off. But he's piqued my interest because I want to know who number 3 is. Number 3 is almost like number 1 now. Right? Because I knew it would be Cream or Jimi Hendrix. I know Andy, but what's it at number 3? He's mentioned the Jam, and they're not on it. He's done ZZ Top. He's got Primus, Nirvana. Who's it going to be? At number 3, I have Green Day. Right? As a choice that will not be at number 3. Green Day will not be at number 3. But I will mention that Green Day are actually the biggest selling power trio of all time. Pipping to the post Nirvana. Right? And they've all... These 3 biggest selling power trios have all sold around about 75 million records. It's always interesting to look at what is popular and compare it to what's being originator is. Hendrix and Cream, they're originators. But the 3rd biggest selling power trio of all time, I would say, is a super hyper originator. Not Green Day. Not Blink-182. Right, what other power trios could I have missed? Come on, shout some to me. Right, who else is there? Thin Lizzy, when they started off, they were a power trio with Eric Bell. I don't know why I thought they got mounted, haven't you? And another thing that's got to be mentioned is that, your bands like Led Zeppelin, right, they are power trios, except they've got a singer. Freer like that. It's still guitar, bass and drums, right? But we don't count those. But I just thought I should mention that, just in case anyone brings it up, because I know people like to say, well, technically, Led Zeppelin were power trio, actually, in terms of the instruments. Yeah. But no, I wish I hadn't gone down that road. Who else? You see, it's actually, once you've got past the ones I've mentioned, right, it's quite hard to think of power trios. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's loads of blues ones, like, you got Steve Ray Vaughan's band, and then it was the blind guy with his guitar on his lap, Jeff Healey. Oh, he was brilliant, he was. They've all got, a lot of those guys will have a power trio. I've played in a few power, and you're just peddling now, because that one that doesn't like to hear your monologue, they're sat there waiting for number 3. Shall I just put you out of your misery, right? At number 3, I have got, number 3 is a new number 1, remember? I have got the Police. Bloody hell, obviously, yes. Police. Oh, I don't know how they like Police on the list, Andy. They're a bit poppy, aren't they? But they were good musicians, weren't they? They were. Right. Police are a strange band, because in the early 80s, they are the biggest band in the world. Right. They come out of 2 scenes. They come directly out of the 1960s, 1970s progressive rock, jazz rock movement. They are a product of prog. But they survive in the age of punk. And they survive by pretending to be a punk band when they are absolutely not a punk band. Right, they get their hair cut short and they dye it blonde, a bit spiky, no piercings, none of that, but they make themselves a little bit new wave, and they play with aggression. That's one of the things, a little bit like, say, Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden are like a progressive metal band, but they played with a bit of aggression coming from punk, and the Police are similar like that. There's 2 bands that I'm here. I said it was Motorhead. The other one is the Police. The Police take the power trio structure and they completely redefine it. So in a power trio, you have big drums. In the 1960s, they'd had small drums, right? But drummers like Bev Bevan, and then John Bonham, they start playing these big drums, and it fills that sound out right in the middle. Then most power trios, you're going to want a big Bonham-y sound to peel that out, and then you're going to have the guitars really crunchy and up front, lots of guitar solos, lots of extemporizations like Cream, and that's the thing. The Police, they know that inside out. Andy Summers is a guitarist, has been around, because he's like, how old is that guy? 35 when the Police is formed in the 70s. Andy Summers is now 82 years old, right? He's come up playing in a whole bunch of 60s rock bands. He's hung out with Hendrix. He knows Clapton. He's come from that, He's ends up playing on the Canterbury scene with Kevin Ayres, who was part of Soft Machine, Caravan, and all that ilk of Canterbury progressive rock. Because of that, he's in contact with Gong, and Gong, which are fracturing in the mid-70s. Mike Howlett, the bass player, goes out on tour, and Andy Summers is drawn in, and they get this jazz rock fusion bass player from up in Newcastle called Gordon Sumner, who now goes by Sting, and they pull in Stuart Copeland, who is probably the most well-known because he played in the progressive rock band Curved Air before that, and he'd also had a hit record under the pseudonym Clark Kent. And I'm pretty sure this weird sort of, Gong splintered group going around Europe off the back of, this weirdness that, one guy's out Curved Air and the other one's played with Kevin Ayres. Who would have thought that would produce one of the biggest bands in the world? But it does. Right? And the reason is because that progressive rock element, which has been challenged by this new sort of drawing in, this refinement that happened after punk. But it's not just punk, it's also disco. It's a whole bunch of things that are happening in the late 70s. It's people have stopped staying in, they're going back out. They want to go to clubs. They want to jump up and down. They want to listen to disco. That's what's happening at that time. And the clever progressive rock musicians pull it in. How can I express myself? And Andy Summers, he's basically a jazz guitarist, but he pulls it in. He starts to use effects. He starts to thin the guitar sound. He's using arpeggios, very much in the way that, say, the John McLaughlin had in the Mavish Nocturne. He's using arpeggios to fill the sound out. He's extending the chords like a jazz musician, adding in ninths. And Stuart Copeland, who was like the son of a sort of American, was it the army? Or intelligence or something. Anyway, he travelled the world and spent time in Africa. So he'd grown up with African rhythms, right? Everyone says it's reggae. Well, it was reggae to a certain extent, but when they hear the Clash playing reggae and that sort of two-tone things happening in the UK with bands like Selector and the Specials and then Madness coming out, they all jump in. But Stuart Copeland has such a unique approach to drumming. There's been, on the drums, a number of sound innovators, right? This is a huge thing. Joe Jones was one. When Joe Jones joined the Count Basie orchestra in the mid-30s, he changed time onto the hi-hats. That was a big shift. When Kenny Clarke, was playing with Charlie Parker, he changed time to the ride cymbal. That was a big change, right? Certain drummers, I think like Earl Palmer, they took from like Fats Domino, because rhythm and blues was sung, but boogie woogie piano was straight, and they started to play straight 16th notes beats. That was a change. We can go through all these things, the guy from the Hollies, the drummer that I can't remember his name, who on one session decided that the bass drum was more important than the snare drum and stuck a mic into the bass drum. These are the sound innovators. Stuart Copeland was possibly the last great sound innovator on acoustic drums before the drum machine comes in. He tuned his toms and his snare drum up high, really high, and then he wound in the frequencies on the desk, and he played through effects to use his delays to make the drums sound, bigger, but not bigger like John Bonham, but more detailed and funky and quirkier. He used things like splash cymbals. He uses octobands to create these little bits of colour that he would punctuate in between these incredible grooves that were not like your sort of Cream, Sunshine of Your Love, unison. And everyone plays exactly the same thing. The bass and the guitar would work together and work within each other with little bits of space, which Stuart Copeland would punctuate. And he would punctuate it in a way that for a mainstream, number one single selling group is probably the most weirdest drumming anybody has ever done. He would turn the drums upside down. He would put the normal place where you would have the downbeats, he wouldn't put it there. He would experiment. He would not play the snare drum. He would not do this. He would not do that. The Police were an incredible band, and I haven't mentioned Sting's songwriting. Sting is one of the greatest singers and one of the greatest songwriters. He's such an incredible player that when he brought in from Wynton Marsalis's band Kenny Kirkland, one of the greatest jazz pianists to ever live, one of the greatest jazz pianists of the last 40 years, I saw an interview with Kenny Kirkland, and he said he would quite happily sit with Sting playing double bass, playing jazz standards, because he could play at that level, right? He can pick up a lute and do those Dowland, what's his name? This sort of medieval stuff. He can do all that, play classical guitar, and he can play bass, and he can sing and at the same time play these insane bass lines. They were a hell of a band. Sting is such a talent, and his talent and his vision sort of pulls the band apart, because he was willing to compromise on the first few albums, but once he got in the studio, understood how the studio worked, and got that experience behind him, he wanted to call the shots, and it's gradually became the Sting solo band, with two session guys, playing in the background. And although Andy Summers is a pretty reasonable session guitarist, I don't think Stuart Copeland had the psychology to be a session drummer. And the worst thing is that when he did get complete control, which he did on their final album, which had the huge hit "Every Breath You Take," rather than it destroying the band, it made the band even more successful. An incredible band. They were around for how many years? Like what they emerged 78, I would suppose, 77, 78, let's say 78, and they were gone by 1983. It's like 5 years. That's who we got number 3. Shall we return now to Cream and Hendrix? Because I have got a surprise up my sleeve on this video. The trio, the power trio I am putting at number 1 is not the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It's not the Band of Gypsies. And now I get here, I know that they've got a name, and I don't know what they're called. I can't even remember it because it's not the classic Hendrix power trio. But the best group he ever had was the group he had in 1970 that played at the Isle of Wight Festival, which comprised of Billy Cox on bass from the Band of Gypsies and Mitch Mitchell on drums from the Jimi Hendrix Experience. That group was something else. Absolutely incredible. And that's who I'm putting forward as number 1. But I suppose it's all of Hendrix power trios at number 1. You know, it would be hard to choose because there's a classic innovative brilliance about the Jimi Hendrix Experience. There's a raw funkiness and sort of jazz abandon about the Band of Gypsies. But that third one, was it called the Electric Church? It did have a name. It's the one that sort of plays on Cry of Love and War Heroes. And I've been getting into that stuff, you see, because really that's the last stuff we have of Hendrix, because, you know, he recorded through 1970. He dies in September 1970. And all that material was never finished. So it's resurfaced in all sorts of different, forms. But tracks like Isabella, for me, when I was coming up, they were the classic Hendrix tracks. They were so funky. There's a funkiness that you get from the Band of Gypsies. But you've got that exploratory, Tony Williams-esque drumming from Mitch Mitchell. This has seemed like a bit of a mess as we've got to the end of the video. And we are at the end now. And it seems like I've cocked up, really. But I may have cocked up. But in cocking up, rather than panicking, I kept my cool, right? And I kept going. And I took the mistakes that I made and I tried to make something out of them, right? But I do feel it's a bit messy. So I'm going to go through my list again. At number 10, Primus. At number 9, Robin Trower. At number 8, Nirvana. At number 7, ZZ Top. At number 6, Motorhead. At number 5, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. At number 4, Rush. At number 3, The Police. At number 2, Cream. At number 1, Jimi Hendrix. I'm done. Let's move on to the next one. And you know what the next one's going to be? I'm going to look, and it won't be a popular video. No one will be interested in this one, but it's fascinating to me. I am going to look at the history of British jazz rock. You heard it. Ian Carr, Colosseum, Soft Machine, If, Isotope. Another one with Colin Hodgkinson, I can't even remember, Backdoor. Right, all these weird, unpopular jazz rock bands, right? I'm going to be going through those because they're absolutely... I'll tell you about us British jazz rock bands. They may not have been famous like Weather Report and Return to Forever, but my God, we didn't kowtow here to a bunch of jazz rock funky fusion, and end up sounding like bloody Shack Attack. Oh God, they were a British band, we did, didn't we? So that's the next one I've got to do. I'm going to be doing, probably do this tomorrow, I'm going to pit Jimi Hendrix against the Beatles. People have asked for me to do it. All right, so I'm going to use the superiometer, so that will be an objective decision. We will know who the best is out of those two at the end. So please look forward to that, And if you want to see these, then what you're going to do is subscribe. So press like and subscribe, right? And if you want to support me financially, which I really do want you to do, You can support me financially very easily by becoming a Patreon, and the link is down below, or you can put some money in my PayPal tip jar. Okay, we're done. Look at the bloody... the carpet. Oh my God, you can see why I didn't want to wear the hat. But I know that people have stepped to the end of the video going, Andy's got a hat on, because he was a bit embarrassed about what his hair looked like, because he's been wearing that hat outside while he's been doing his job of chopping up a sofa, because he didn't want to stick it outside and pay the council to take it to the tip. So he decided to saw it up into small parts like you would a dead body that you'd murdered, and then sneak it up to the tip. And in doing that, to fit into the tip, he decided to put this hat on, thinking that although he's a lily-livered musician that spent his whole time just sitting in the back of dressing rooms or teaching kids music, right, that he could try and pass himself off as a proper man who does work by wearing that hat. But in doing that, it compressed his hair because he is vain. He didn't want people to see the hair. But I want to see the hair. Well, you've seen the hair now. Right, we're done, aren't we? I'm just wittering on. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll switch it off now. Ugh. My back's hurting from all the bloody work I've done, so I won't be able to do it as quick as I normally do. Right, we're done. Bye-bye, everybody.